This episode is sponsored by the Soul of Business Experience, a leadership community with curated resources for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their careers. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. We're coming up on 250 episodes. Actually, by the time you listen to this one and watch this one, we will have passed that milestone. And I mention that for this reason. Over 250 interviews, very eclectic guests. I've been amazed at the range of experiences that the guests have brought. From a major general in the Army to somebody that is working with spiritual energy to just runs all over the place here. And the focus here obviously is embedded in the title of the show, The Soul of Business. And that's an important point to make, because what we're looking at is how does the life force that runs through everything facilitate itself in expressing as fully as it can what it is. It takes the form of the tree that I'm looking at outside my window here. It takes the form of the ocean that I'm looking at that continues to breathe as the waves and the tides move. It also takes the form of people. 7+ billion, almost 8 billion of us now, differentiated expressions of this same source. And each one of us is unique, so incredibly unique. And for a lot of folks, in my experience, particularly the ones that I've interviewed, the lid that gets clamped on that inhibits that expression gets put in place pretty early on in life. It's our family of origin. There's some epigenetic phenomenons that come into place here, passed down from grandparents and that sort of thing. And then we go to school, and then we get born into a specific society, and we've got expectations, and we end up living, for the most part, for most people on this planet, other people's expectations of who we are supposed to be. And we lose connection to that uniqueness of who we are. Now, I mention all of that as a preamble here because my guest today, Jack Wagner, is one of the most fascinating young adults I have met in my life. And I mean that very sincerely. I know a whole lot of folks. And Jack he captured my imagination real early on in a preliminary conversation we had when he invited me to be on his podcast. And we'll talk about that in just a moment here. But when I say he captured my imagination is the threshold of the soul. That's something that Carl Jung actually put in place here. Imagination is the gateway to the soul. We imagine possibilities. We imagine a life that could be, all of that sort of stuff. Back when he was 16, moved to Europe, moved to France, actually, as a non-French speaker, no English around him, no safety net. And by 17, he was fluent in French. He had started an online business, and he was managing a team of 4 from his home in London. He actually lives in London right now. When you think of entrepreneurs, when you think of folks that have gone through life, gone through experiences, gone through what Warren Bennis at one time called the crucible of life, the crucible, where things get pressurized and they get heated, and then something magical happens and something emerges out of that. That happens for most folks at some point in their lives. Whether it's a midlife crisis or whatever it might be, but it ends up producing a shift in the paradigm, the shift in the way we think of who we are. Jack, in my experience, has had that experience by the time he was 17. He's actually working with something, and this is what I want to actually focus our conversation on today, the duality of gratitude and ambition, which is, for him, and actually, and we've explored this a bit, a framework for building both the floor, which is present state fulfillment, and the ceiling, forward-moving drive, simultaneously. How do you get these things to combine? The beauty of this is it begins to moot the question of where does burnout occur? Because as long as I'm connected to spirit, burnout is not going to be something that actually occurs in my experience. Burnout is a consequence of being detached from purpose. That's what burnout ends up producing. So with that much longer preamble than I normally do, I want to welcome Jack to the show. Yeah, it's great to have you here.
Blaine, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. I'm so grateful, ironically, that we met. And yeah, I think that everything you said there resonates so deeply. And when we're able to connect with with spirit and with what we're here to do, you're right. Burnout doesn't occur after that.
Yeah. Yeah. I get out of bed in the morning going, what's next? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's next? Yeah. Um, you moved to France or you moved to Europe, when what was the catalyst for the move? This is something I did not ask you when we were together on your podcast. What was the catalyst for the move?
So I think I kind of got to the point where I felt like I'd done everything, but I still needed more. So I
At
was
16, I had done everything.
I mean, I've always been a very ambitious person. That's always been a part of it. And so every opportunity in front of me, I've always taken it and taken it to the fullest. And when I was in high school, I mean, at 16, so when I first made this decision to move, I was 15. And I had nearly perfect grades in school. I was a three-sport athlete, actually four sports. So I was playing my freshman year of high school. I played baseball, soccer, basketball, which I was terrible at. And then I was a competitive rock climber as well. So I'm doing all of these things. I mean, I have an amazing life, incredible family. I have a fun job as a rock climbing instructor, managing a front desk at this age. But I'm like, I need more. I need to do more. And it's that word need that's so important that was embedded in my vocabulary. I needed to do more in order to feel the way that I was chasing. Because after I accomplished all of these things, whether it was making a great play in a baseball game or it was getting the class rankings coming out and seeing how high I was on that list, all of these accomplishments that would give me this feeling, this fleeting feeling that I was so attached to. And I felt like, here we go. Here's a big step I could take. Move to France for a year. Nobody's done this before in my hometown. How about I do this? It sounds like an incredible challenge. And it was an incredible challenge, but it was done out of this idea that I needed to do more in order to feel this certain way.
Yeah, there's so much that I can speak to on this. Yeah, when I first went to Europe, I was uh, I think I was 19, 20, right in that neighborhood. But it was, yeah, Maslow's hierarchy had come into play there. This whole notion of self-actualization really struck me when I was reading Maslow. And, yeah, I was a very eclectic reader when I was a kid. I still am. But there was that idea of more. That idea of more. There was nobody in my environs that had ever done some of the stuff that I was, looking to do. I had put together, I did mention this in the podcast I did with you. I put together a bucket list when I was 18, and by the time I was 24, everything on that list is done. That bucket list was comprised of stuff that I didn't know anybody that had done it. I know that people had done it, but I knew nobody that had done it. What I was struck with was two things. One, the notion of more is a very seductive dynamic. There's
Yes.
that comes into play, but there's also, where do I set the bar? And by the time I was 24, I looked at that list and I need to start dreaming a whole lot bigger than what I was doing. So there's a couple of things that I want to actually organize around. One is that first piece, the metric of external validation. Where's my name on the list?
Yes.
Those sorts of things. And you used the word fleeting. It was kind of like, and then it dissipates. The idea of moving from gratitude and ambition. So ambition is one thing, and it's usually measured by externalized assessments.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of gratitude has something completely different to do with that dynamic. So when did you begin to say there's a polarity here, but it's not an either or. They actually if I take a stick or if I take this pen, it's got two ends. One's a pointy end, one's a blunt end, but it's all part of the same pen. And I can start cutting the pen in half, but it's still going to have two ends to it. And I don't care how small I make it, it's still going to have two ends. Gratitude and ambition are always going to be in play there. When did you begin to actually wrestle with this? Because this really is not only an existential exploration, but it's also a really interesting philosophical exploration.
Well, I think that it always kind of nagged at me that no matter what I was doing, I didn't quite feel like enough. And there was this voice in my head. And I think every time that I accomplished something, it would get a little bit stronger. It would get a little bit stronger. And as the magnitude of those accomplishments increased, the magnitude of that voice started to increase kind of linearly with it. And there was a specific moment at the end of this year in France. So at this point, I'm 17 and I had built my first business. I had learned French. I'd done the impossible. I had an incredible group of friends in a country that just 8 months prior, I knew absolutely nobody in. And I'd done all of these things. And these were the things that was my equivalent of the bucket list, right? Where they seemed so huge to me. I knew nobody that had ever done things equivalent to this. And I'd done them. And I felt great for a second. And then they started to go away. And there was this moment in the mirror. And I'm so lucky being someone that tells stories that I actually had this pivotal moment for myself. But I remember this moment in the mirror and I was looking at myself and I just didn't love what I was seeing anymore. I had just I had attached so much to the future vision, the future goal. And at this point, I was already thinking of what is it going to be next? And there were numbers out in my head, like 3 years later, 4 years later. What about now, Jack? I started to realize that if I constantly and incessantly attached everything I had to a future version of a goal, I would devalue the one thing that I was ever truly guaranteed, which is the present moment. And so it was at this moment and in the upcoming months from there that I started to think and I started to write and introspect and realize that I could be happy, fulfilled, whatever words you want to use now while still pursuing more. I would never stop working toward things. I would never stop setting goals because that progress is so fulfilling. But it's the attachment to the end of it that was really causing this suffering in my life. I would go as far to say as it was suffering. And if I could just flip the switch and understand that now has all of the necessary requirements to feel great and I can still build that, then I might feel the way that I was really hoping to feel, which is possible in the moment now. It's omnipresent. These resources are omnipresent. They're always there. And so it's at this moment and in the upcoming months that I started to build out this idea in my mind, toy with it, learn from other sources, ask people about it, and develop it.
So, so that was kind of the genesis of, the gratitude and the ambition piece actually coming together. And I'm particularly mindful of the fact that you recognize that attachment to the outcome that's where the rub is actually present in. And can you talk a little bit about the way in which that awareness, I'm not going to say discovery, but the way that that awareness began to appear for you? Was there any, and this is where the existential question comes into play here, because a lot of people will identify their identity as attached to the outcomes. I am my results. As you started peeling things back and letting go of the death grip on the outcome, can you talk a little bit about your experience of that process? Because a lot of people are very reluctant to let go of that.
Well, honestly, Blaine, that process of letting go is not a complete process. It's a spectrum to the point where it's something that I'm always working toward. And it's the answer that nobody wants to hear, right?
Sure.
Everyone wants to hear, yeah, Jack said that you can just do this one thing in 5 minutes and you feel completely present and detached from the outcome. No, it's a constant process. And I would be lying if I told you that I knew exactly how you can completely detach because I don't think I may be wrong, but I think that it's always going to be a spectrum and that you're always going to kind of like in math, there's an asymptote, right? Where you infinitely approach closer to a point. And I think that that's what we're doing. So in my process of detaching, it's a very conscious process. Like we said, I developed that sort of awareness of what I was doing through recognizing the suffering and kind of introspecting and gaining information. But the progress that came from this and the more awareness came from me actually trying to implement what I had learned and figure out how I was going to focus more on the present moment. And what I realized is that my mind is always going to be focusing on something. And so if I'm focusing on the outcome, I'm able to substitute that focus with something for the now. So if I started focusing on the outcome, if I started comparing myself to people with the outcome that I wanted, if I started looking for external metrics to give me some type of internal feeling, I would substitute that with doing something that made me very present, made me very grateful, whether that be writing things down, whether it be just taking a second of silence and telling myself, I'm so grateful for these things. I'm so grateful for me, for being in this space where I get to do these certain things, or being with people that make me grateful, sharing that gratitude, and really understanding and taking time to understand that right now it has these ingredients, as I said, to feel that feeling of gratitude, to feel that feeling of presence, because in the feeling of presence, I don't feel the feeling of not enough.
And you talk about, paradigmatic frames. Not enough is one that is wildly rampant in the world today. Yeah. Not enough, just enough, more than enough. Those are three paradigms, that we can work with. Yeah. And I know that you've had a conversation with my good friend and business partner, David Meltzer. And David and I've had long conversations about those paradigms, just kind
Yeah.
of this actually frames out. You're right now enrolled in a course of study at Northeastern University, I believe, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Behavioral
Yes.
science and philosophy.
Yes.
And the I say behavioral science, but basically it's, you're looking from a perspective on how does the brain process information, behavioral neuroscience. Yeah. Philosophy, I mean, I'm just going to go down a rabbit hole here just a bit. And I want to just kind of get your take on this. First of all, reality, and we'll go to neuroscience first here, but reality is an interpreted construct. We'll just kind of put a pin in that. There is no reality that is that everybody agrees on. It's all filtered through and interpreted by the individual mind. So we end up with 8 billion different senses of what reality is on this planet. So I'm going to hold that for just a moment because there's a notion called the plural universe that kind of comes into play with this. The idea of philosophy. I'm just fascinated by philosophy. I mean, my doctorate's in philosophy. And metaphysics is the oldest branch of philosophy. It goes back about 5,000 years or so. It informed a lot of Aristotle's and Platonic philosophy, certainly Stoic philosophy. But the idea of metaphysics is the nature of reality. So when we start marrying the two, and I'm interested here just from the aspect of how your study is informing, particularly on the neuroscience side, the nature of reality from a philosophical perspective. Now, it's a very abstract question, and I'm probably butchering it here just a bit. In the work that you're doing, in the study that you're doing right now, and I know you don't have a graduate degree in it or anything else, but I'm just interested as you kind of lift the cover up and you're kind of peering under the hood here. What are you noticing about how the mind works? Forget the brain, but how the mind works, and philosophy and its imprinting from a philosophical perspective.
Well, I find it so fascinating, and I'll be honest. Where in school we haven't gotten deep at all into the mechanisms of how the brain works, because before that we have to get into organic chemistry and how molecules work and things along those lines. But from what I have learned, what I see intertwining philosophy and neuroscience is so amazing, because there's so many connections that were made, like back in metaphysics days, back in Aristotle and ancient ancient philosophy days, that connect to exactly what we're learning about the brain, right? And this goes, I want to find like I don't have a specific example in mind when talking about this, but I've done reading in terms of old philosophy. I've read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and he talks about so many things in terms of your discipline, in terms of how you're going to accomplish what you set out to do, how to be a happier person. He talks a lot about what you're focusing on. And your brain actually has mechanisms that back up a lot of these different ideas of what we're doing, of what early philosophers thought would control the way that we feel, that we act in our lives. I'm not sure if I answered your question in the way that you were looking for, but yeah.
I wasn't particularly putting it in a box. I was just interested, just kind of in your study, where are you Where are you at, and what are you, kind of discovering here? And the idea of, and I'm glad you brought up meditations, because that was a private diary. Yeah, Marcus Aurelius did not intend for anybody to read that, and it's become one of the most widely read books on philosophy in the world. The way that, I'm going to put a pin in this. Behavior is the analog to meaning. It's the physical expression of meaning. So we will always behave in ways that are meaningful to us. And this is where, the neuroscience comes into play here. But how do we construct meaning? Because that literally becomes our reality. I was reading something today here. What you feel you are always dominates what you feel you would like to be. Sensation precedes manifestation and is the foundation upon which all manifestation rests. Be careful of your moods and feelings, for there is an unbroken connection between your feelings and your visible world. I say imagination creates reality. And if this premise is true, then imagination fulfills itself in what your life becomes. Now, that's Neville Goddard speaking. Aldous Huxley talked about the perennial philosophy. I mean, this perennial philosophy will go back 5,000 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got an unbroken lineage. And I'm fascinated by where you're at in your life right now. Where do you see, just given the study that you're doing, given the work that you're doing, because honestly, Jack, it is unusual for somebody of your age. And I mean that in the fulsomeness.
Yes.
I mean, I'm in awe of where you're at right now. I truly am. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? What's kind of on the horizon for you?
So, man, this is a great question, because I go back and forth in how much I should be picturing 10 years from now. Where is the threshold of my want to know exactly, like, I want a goal and I'm going to work toward this in this time frame, and also I should let things come to me, right? And I think it's a really interesting dilemma, because I believe that as you get older, you should maybe have a more rigid, not rigid, but more structured plan of what your life looks like. But if you think about a tree and it branching out, I'm at the branch right now where I could be over here, and how clear do I want to be? I think, honestly, Blaine, in the past 6 months, I've gotten a lot clearer, and I've started to realize that people that tell me to stay completely open and just don't commit to anything yet, those people are projecting things about themselves where they never truly figured out what lit them up and what they love to do.
That's true.
And I could not be more sure about what I love to do. And it's something that I'm absolutely blessed to have in my life. But I've recognized that, and I've become more confident in it, which has allowed me to kind of narrow my vision down a little bit more, if that makes sense. What I'm looking to do right now, and what I see myself doing for my life, is I want to be someone that understands why humans operate the way we do, how humans operate, why are people making these decisions. And I want to be the person that can go into an organization and help people make better decisions that are not just going to make them more money, but are going to make them happier. And I want to do this in all levels of life. I want to be able to do this for athletes, for people that are just on the street. I want to be so knowledgeable. I want to study this information so much that I'm able to really help anyone figure out how they can live a better life. And it's a very broad thing, right? Right now, I'm focused on a more narrow aspect of it, which is fulfillment in terms of ambition and gratitude, because that's where my story comes from.
Right.
And that's where I think I'm best able to help people now, which is why I'm focused on that, because I want to grow linearly. I want to grow deep and then expand the breadth of that, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
But right now, so I don't think I've even said this publicly on a podcast before or to you privately, but this summer, when I get back to the US in 9 days now, less than that, 8 days now, I am going to be spending some time in New York and virtually working with an incredible man named Chris Shembra. And Chris he's a master at the art of human connection and gratitude. And he goes into companies and does gratitude experiences and talks about human connection, and has worked with incredible companies and just helps people really develop relationships with each other. And for me right now, while I'm looking at the world, I integrate AI and artificial intelligence into the things that I do. I think it's very important, but I recognize that I'm not an expert in that. And I recognize what I'm good at and what I love to do. And I'm going to let other people be the ones that are the AI nerds. And I want to be the human connection nerd, because as we move more into that idea of automation, I think it leaves more space for us to connect as human beings. And that connection is where we're going to grow as a society. Last time we talked about how can we as a society transform. And as I've done more thinking on that, I think it comes down to not just these massive relationships of one to many on the internet, but really growing our circles, our personal circles in terms of depth of relationships with the people around us. And I think that is the really exciting possibility of automation in our lives, that we might be able to have more time to just spend with each other. And I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but the other night, I just posted this yesterday on LinkedIn. I actually canceled a meeting because I wanted to go to dinner with my friends. And I think that that is so important, because normally people nowadays are like grind, work, do all this stuff. But it goes back to the duality of gratitude and ambition. What am I doing it for? I have these things now and I need to feed them. And so I got to connect with my friends, and that meeting got rescheduled. No big deal. But my friends and I are going to disperse in all directions, and we're not going to see each other for months probably. And it's spending that quality time that deepens our relationships with each other, that gets us the fulfillment and the joy we want. And it's doing things like that, Blaine, that I see myself doing for the rest of my life at bigger scales, impacting more people. So 10 years from now, I think I'll be doing the same things, just impacting more people,
broader scale,
deeper, with more. I will have grown as a person, so I'll be able to do that.
I actually thank you for that answer. I love where you're heading with this. The idea, I'd put a pin in this. I'm going to pull the pin out now.
Let's do it.
The idea of a pluriverse. Yeah. How reality is constructed. There's 8 billion different versions of it right now. Interestingly, and this is where the whole feeling piece, sensation precedes manifestation. Fear is the lowest common denominator. It's the easiest emotion to access, and it's one that is leveraged by politicians around the world. And when people are fearful, things contract. We move into I, me, mine, we, our, us, they. I mean, all of that kind of linguistics dynamics comes into play here. The notion of a pluriverse basically suggests that reality as we experience it is a construct of many minds. Yeah, they are, collectively produce this thing that we call the world of reality. It's a world of agreement. We've agreed that this is the way it is, not vocally agreed, but in the way that we think. Well, the work that you see yourself doing in the next 10 years, how do you see, and this is my work as well, how do you see yourself impacting the pluriverse? What would you see coming into play with that?
Well, I think you said it perfectly. Reality and our shared reality is just a part of it. I think of a Venn diagram, right? And there's 8 billion different realities, and our collective reality is a Venn diagram of 8 billion of them where they're overlapping. And some of us get to have better shared realities than others. Like Blaine, I think you and I have a broader shared reality because we agree on many things. We have many concepts that we agree with, and we are able to listen to each other and hear each other, and we're very open. And I think that create a broader and a more stable shared reality. And so in thinking of how I would apply my work to the pluriverse and how I see those two ideas intersecting, I think right now our pluriverse is very much built on fear and emotions like fear. And like we said, those emotions it's what we feel right now, not what we're thinking of feeling in the future, that dictates our reality, right? And so if we as a collective society are sharing our reality based on negative emotions such as fear that are easily accessed, then we're creating a culture of fear. Our shared reality is fear. And when our shared reality is something that we don't like, I think it not only promotes more of it, but it also incentivizes people to go back to their own little corner of reality and isolate themselves because it's where they feel comfortable and safe. So what my idea is I want to create a shared reality. And this is what so many incredible people have been trying to do for the length of humanity, right? But it takes people that have this vision to create better change in the world. And it's to create a shared reality of positive ideas, of love, of connection, of joy, of fulfillment, where we're not bonding over this fear anymore, where we can create this Venn diagram can expand a little bit. And instead of being a small bottle of fear, it can maybe expand a little bit where we all share collective ideas of love and gratitude for certain things. And it sounds like all kumbaya, but I think it's possible. And it's just as long as there are people out there trying to do this work, and I know so many people, I'm lucky enough to constantly meet with people that believe this is possible, then we can do it.
I absolutely could not agree with you more. I look at you, I see myself when I was your age, and I'm very hopeful for the future. I'm always hopeful for the future. Jack, gotta put a bow on this, but I want to thank you for being such an articulate, such an inspirational, and such a genuinely authentic guest. I'm just very honored to be able to have this conversation, bring it out into the public. But more importantly, I'm just very honored to be able to know you and to be able to support what you're up to. So thank you for being who you are, for showing up.
Thank you, Blaine. Yeah, that means so much coming from you. And I say the same thing to you. You were an incredibly authentic guest. I got so many amazing messages after it. Like, who is this guy? Why is he so awesome? And then you're an amazing, amazing host as well. So I'm so grateful that we've been able to connect and to see what we end up doing together.
And we will be doing some stuff together. There is no question about
Yes.
that. You're going to be meeting with my good friend and partner, Pushkar Anand, a little bit
Yes.
later this week. So give him my best. I'm going to circle back with him and tell him to take good care of you.
Sounds good. We're going to some Pizza Express or something like that.
Okay. It's perfect. It's perfect. Okay. Okay. Folks, you've been listening to Jack Wagner, and check him out. Jack, where can people find out more about you? I know the LinkedIn profile is probably the easiest one to access, but is there other places that people can get more of what you're up to, particularly around the gratitude and ambition?
Go see the Grateful podcast. I've published over 125 episodes with incredible minds like Blaine and others. And sometimes I do solo episodes. And that's really the culmination of everything I'm doing. It's where you get to be curious with me. You get to learn with me from my perspective. And we just get to create, we get to co-create realities that are really building toward this idea of fulfillment. And I think it's my favorite podcast, even though it's my own. And I would love for you guys to go check it out.
Folks, thank you for listening. This has been another episode of the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. As always, I'm going to close with this admonition. In your life, just go out and take a walk in nature. And when you're walking in nature, I want you to pay attention. I want you to look at, how does nature organize itself? Everything in nature, everything that you will observe at some point in time in its life cycle serves as a center of distribution. It's distributing something. It's distributing what it has to distribute. There's nothing in nature that serves exclusively as a center of accumulation. And when you do find a center of accumulation, it's a dead and dying part of nature. Life thrives and literally depends on distribution. So in your life today, as you go out and you play the game of life that is yours to play, do it through the lens of being a center of distribution. Find a way to give something away, whether it's a smile, a hug, an insight that you've noticed, whatever it might be. Tip the bill if you're at a restaurant. Delight somebody. Be a center of distribution. Be and act as if you are a part of nature, because you are. And that's the way that the life that you want to live will manifest itself most fully, as a center of distribution. See you on the next episode, Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. This is your host, Blaine Bartlett. Take care. This episode is sponsored by the Soul of Business Experience, a leadership community with curated resources for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their careers. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.